Okay, good evening and welcome to the most recent version of Building the Scottish State with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught from the University of Rennes on this 14th of October, 2021. And I have the great pleasure to have with me my colleague from a research group that I've formed over the past several months, the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group. And it's Mr. John Brown, who is a dear friend of mine and is with us this evening to talk about independence and how we get there and other things and anything else that comes up. So first of all, John, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Pleasure. Hi, Mark.
Okay, so just tell us a bit about your career. You've been a civil servant. You've served in the UK government, and I believe for the Department of Work and Pensions. And just tell us a little bit about how your career and how that's informed your view towards Scottish independence.
Well, as a UK civil servant, I started at 18 and worked my way over 40 years, ending up as a senior manager, delivering benefits to people across Scotland. So I've been around just about every office, every DWP office in Scotland. I've knocked on doors, climbed stairs. I've seen all sorts of people, all stratas of society in my job. So I've got a good picture through my work of Scottish society. I, as a civil servant, avoided politics. I even tried to avoid politicians, believe it or not. It's very hard to do this.
I can believe it.
And it was only once I retired that I got involved with politics and the independence movement. I retired in 2008. And I actually surprised my family with my interest, activity, and passion for independence. Managed, I think, to convert a few family members to the cause.
Mm-hmm. And what in your experience as a UK civil servant, inspired your passion or your interest in independence? Was it just the dysfunctioning of it?
There was a dysfunction, but my motivation for independence, I think, comes from out with my job. It's more about the people rather than the actual civil service as an organ of state. It needs vast improvement. It could do better. It's been eroded over the years. It's become more politicized since I left. But my motivation on independence comes from the people that I, interacted with, who worked for me or with me in the civil service. And my view is that we can make a great difference to people. And that's my motivation. I still take an interest in the civil service. I mean, what the Scottish government is doing in terms of social security is taking us back to what I would call the good days in terms of social security in the UK. They're making the right moves very slowly, but I haven't been involved. I've looked at it from afar because the risk is that people in Scotland who are taking forward Social Security Scotland would look at someone like me, a former senior manager in DWP, and say, well, there are so many things you did wrong. Why would we take your advice? That's a risk. So I haven't approached people and said, why don't you think, right? I would rather watch people with fresh ideas and new to that sort of service, that business, come up with good ideas.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, based on my experience in your participation, I mean, you have some amazingly good ideas. So I would be surprised if they would refuse to listen to your counsel, even if you were, a civil servant in the DWP. But what would you advise, and how would you change things? You can talk about more narrowly, the Department of Work and Pensions. How could that, what kind of equivalent could be, because that's obviously a reserve power. It's a UK institution, and there's no real Scottish equivalent. But I know that the Scottish government has made some changes? There was that, there was, what was it, the rape clause or these other things where they try to mitigate it. What can you tell me about with regard to DWP? What are the powers of the British, the UK state, and then what has the Scottish government done, and what can it do? What can it do? If you can talk a little bit about that relationship.
It can do a lot, and it's doing. It's moving in the right direction. Social security in UK terms is like a big, inefficient, uncaring machine. It appears to have very little personal any concern for people, right? It treats people as numbers. And I think one of the difficulties we will have as a country building a new social security system is that your systems are as good as the computer machines, the data that you have and use to process payments. And the data and the data banks and computer systems that DWP have are antiquated, old, and, as I understand it, quite inflexible. I'm a bit out of date with what they've done, but what they've got. But when I left, and shortly after I left, I could still see that the data, the database and manipulating the information was very difficult. And I think that will give rise to difficulties in Scotland in building a comprehensive system. It will take time, it will take money. But the personal approach, dealing with individuals as people, is the way to go at a local level. And I think that as a policy has been grasped by the Scottish government, but there's a hell of a way to go on it. In general civil service terms, when we're independent, we'll need to build a civil service that is comprehensive and is good. One of the bees in my bonnet is that we have a whole host of special advisors in the civil service. And that gives rise to more politicization of the civil service. SPADs, as they're called, were introduced by, I think, Harold Wilson, probably in the 60s or 70s, because he couldn't trust the civil service. So I would like to think that...
That's special advisors, right?
Special advisors who are political advisors to ministers, right? And they are not really, they are part of the civil service, but they are not the neutral, unbiased civil servant that is part of the core civil service. They provide political advice. So there's a different tier of service. It gives rise to problems, in my view, and it's something that perhaps needs, if not abolished, looked at, reappraised, and managed differently.
Okay.
I won't go. I mean, you could name names in the Scottish government and recent controversies, but my view on SPADs precedes that by some considerable time.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was growing up, I mean, I lived in the United States. I haven't really, but I always had this kind of very impression of the British civil service, that it was very professional. I think my grandfather was a member of the civil service, and yeah, they ran the empire, and the empire wasn't always, pretty, but there was this idea of real competence, real, impartiality. Do you think that's been lost to a large extent?
I think it has, with SPADs or special advisors, and certainly in the senior civil service, and with the growth of agencies, executive agencies, which are arm's length bodies, are managed differently from the civil service. So that again gives rise to perhaps different perceptions with businesses and the public as to the neutrality of the civil service. Civil service there is to serve the government of the day, right? But they have to advise and take the long view, because civil servants are there even after a change of government. In the US, I think probably half the civil service or large parts of the civil service change when you have a.
I think it's just the top. I think it's just the top tier. I'm not sure. I can't say this with any authority, but I think it's pretty much the top management of it, the top, maybe the top, several levels. But I don't think a huge amount of it changes. But I may be wrong. So you may be right. I'm not sure on that.
But again, my feeling is that possibly civil servants and the public in Scotland have they grasped the fact that when we become independent, all bets are off. You start from scratch, or it's the opportunity to start from scratch. We're not going to import the civil service from the UK into the Scottish civil service, even although the Scottish government currently has a civil service. It's a UK civil service, so we have the opportunity to build a different, and I say better, civil service.
And what do you think are the admirable qualities of the British civil service that could be conserved, and what should be rejected? I mean, maybe a lot has changed, but maybe at one point, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, there were very, very admirable aspects of the civil service that you may have worked in. I mean, what do you think could be conserved of at least a bygone civil service, and what do you think should be rejected in terms of very general aspects of the civil service?
Well, I suppose that providing a broad view of any topic, the advice. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the minister, cabinets, ministers that make the decisions. The information to make that decision needs to be complete and fulsome. Otherwise, the chances are you don't get a good decision if a minister doesn't have all the information in front of them. So the impartiality of providing impartial information is the key. The actual decision, the quality of the decision depends on the information provided. And if the wrong decision is made even in the face of good information, then you've got to question the politician.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And let's see, get a couple of questions that have come up. Chalmer, do you think that the UC uplift, I'm not sure what that means, should have been kept? And do you think that benefits should increase? Universal credit, I imagine. So.
Yes,
I guess we can broaden that. What do you think of the current policy of the Department of Work and Pensions? And in my view, it seems increasingly neoliberal, increasingly making a hostile environment for benefits recipients, and kind of forcing them to go back and take any miserable job that they possibly can. I mean, that's the way I see it from my kind of cynical perspective. How do you see it?
Yes, well, universal credit came in as a policy, or was formulated as a policy just before I retired. And yes, I agree that should have been maintained. Universal credit, the policy, was hijacked by a set of nasty politicians. I can't be any blunter than that without swearing. The policy was hijacked. The great problem with DWP benefits in the old days was everybody had a different payday. You couldn't merge, or you couldn't pay several benefits to one person without administrative nightmare. And citizens were confused by the payment system. So it was a simplification and making it easier for people to receive their money with only getting one payment a week or one payment a month.
So it had a certain logic to it, basically.
It had a logic to it, but it's been hijacked and it's been used as a means to press down on the government bill for DWP, and it's been used to treat individuals quite cruelly. I mean, I'm appalled at the number of deaths that have resulted from Tory policies. Through Job Centre Plus, it's criminal, absolutely criminal.
Yeah, exactly. Another one, was the UK not ended when England dragged Scotland out of the EU, so we don't need a referendum? That ties in with our proposal that we've developed,
Yeah.
that basically we've sent to the pro-independence MPs and MSPs, saying that they have the power under international law to dissolve the union. Of the MPs, and to withdraw from the Treaty of Union, and at the Scottish Parliament level to affirm their sovereignty over, or their power, or them as the sole representative of the sovereignty of the Scottish people. So these mechanisms exist, but I would agree with Stephen that you don't need a referendum, and a referendum would be problematic. But what is your view on that, and how what we developed?
Well, I agree entirely. I mean, sovereignty in Scotland lies with the people, and we invest our sovereignty in our politicians. So currently, as I understand it, Scottish sovereignty is invested or trusted to Scottish MPs who are part of the United Kingdom democracy or government system. So if we decide that we want to dissolve the Act of Union, the Treaty of Union, and withdraw from the Union, then our MPs entrusted with our sovereignty can make that decision on our behalf. And to do that, all they need to do is walk out of Westminster and say, we wish to dissolve the Treaty of Union. It's not working. You have breached the treaty, and we want to govern ourselves from Holyrood. Our MSPs in Holyrood Parliament can then pass a motion saying that Holyrood is the only Parliament that can govern Scotland. It's sovereign wish of the people. And we then start negotiating with Westminster and with our international neighbours for recognition. Yeah, it sounds simple. It's not, but it's certainly quick. It's legal and it's democratic.
Exactly. No, obviously I agree. But I think that having a referendum would be, and I know you agree, would be problematic, because there's the question of, okay, Section 30 or non-Section 30. Okay, Section 30, Boris Johnson has said he's not going to grant it. Without a Section 30, subject to legal challenge, all that. And even if a Section 30 were granted, there's the question of the franchise. Would all, as our colleague Alf was pointing out, the idea that people, that is done at this vote in 2014 was done at a local government franchise. With whoever was signed up to vote in the local councils could vote. So anybody with a second home, anybody from England, could. Who had a second home or could vote. And whereas many countries, I live in France, and when I had UK citizenship, I could vote in the local and the European elections, but I couldn't vote in the presidential or parliamentary elections. So many countries have a franchise where, for more core constitutional votes, that you can't vote in, and I had no problem with that. Well, now I can't vote in now I can't vote in anything because
my experience is exactly the same as yours, Mark. I live part of a year in Italy, so I, as a European citizen and a resident in Italy, can vote in local elections, but because I'm not a citizen, I can't vote in parliamentary elections or in constitutional elections. That appears to be a common practice. It doesn't, in my view, that approach, in my view, doesn't prevent a country being open and welcoming to immigrants and people who want to make their life in your country. There is a control and process for citizenship in all countries. So I welcome the phrase, do you want to be Scottish? aye, then you are Scottish. Right? That's simple. But practical terms, there needs to be a process from a I would say civil service point of view, from a local services point of view, ensuring people get correct pay the correct taxes, etc. So citizenship is an important step when you move into another country, and it should be easy and fair and open. But it goes with responsibilities and it goes with freedoms. That's where, having a good constitution written down, clear, simple, makes things much easier and much more acceptable.
Yeah.
In the UK, we don't have that, do we?
No, and so because in the franchise in 2014, as I said, it was open, and as our colleague Alf has pointed out, it was just basically the local council franchise that was able to vote, which meant that anybody who had a second home or whatever, how would if what we were proposing, where the UK SNPs withdraw from the Treaty of Union, the Scottish Parliament declares, declares that it's the sovereignty, and then, but it is, but what is developed in terms of a constitution would need, to have a democratic legitimacy, and so there would need to be a kind of confirmatory referendum. And how would what do you think the proper franchise for that would be? In terms of people have always lived in Scotland, plus those who have lived there, have made their home there. I mean, what do you think would be an appropriate criteria for people who could vote in any kind of constitutional referendum of that nature?
My experience is that for taxation purposes, most countries expect you to have a main home and your residence declared for tax purposes. So if you're a resident and paying taxes in Scotland, then you're entitled to vote. And if it's your permanent residence, then you're entitled to vote. If you're a visitor and you haven't registered to pay taxes in Scotland, then you don't have the franchise. I think that's a simple approach. It doesn't make a distinction in constitutional terms, because I think that comes when you've got an immigration system in place. And you can then differentiate between a franchise for a constitutional issue. It could be managed quite simply, I think. I mean, in Scotland, a great majority of people have, I can't remember the term, it's a bus pass, right? But it's also an entitlement card.
Yes, the saltire card, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, that's a saltire card. Now, that process, that database, that function at local authority level could be used and matched up with the taxation system so that you have proof that you are a permanent resident by using the saltire card and the database. You're registered on that. That to me. But again, in the UK, for whatever, because we don't have this written constitution, people have a great problem with having an identity card, which the saltire card would be. I don't have a hang up about that. But that's a political hurdle that needs to be overcome. The use of something like that as an ID card to entitle you to your franchise.
Yeah,
and
it could be used for many. It could be used for many other purposes as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, it could be used for self-sovereign identity. It could be used as a payment card that you could use at the you could be given benefits directly into your account, and you could use that to pay for stuff at the grocery store. This type of thing. So it's I agree that there's a lot of resistance to that, or kind of psychological resistance to that, of kind of Big Brother type. Type things. And given your experience in the civil service, and I know your passion or your desire for a clear written constitution, what are some of the things that you would include in a written constitution? Where do you start? Maybe it's where do you start, but
exactly. Well, I was having a look. I mean, I showed you how sound a person I am, really. I was reading yesterday a 36-page draft interim constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite comprehensive. And by the time I got halfway through, I was shaking my head and saying, it doesn't seem very people-friendly. It had a lot of legal terms in it and a lot of obscure paragraphs. And I'm thinking, well, to me, a constitution should be in plain English and should be short and sweet. It should have basic, basic rights, basic freedoms should be clearly articulated. But what I saw in that draft was no mention of the obligations that citizens and people in the country should have under the Constitution, right? I mean, just to take a simple obligation is abiding by the laws of the land. That didn't feature anywhere. Lots of lots of lists of freedoms and the freedom to, and rights, but no mention of obligations. It's a two-way street. And it needs to be a manageable and understandable document. Again, my experience in Italy, right? My local town, every year, apart from during the pandemic, all the kids leaving school at the end of school, they go to the town hall with their parents and are presented with a copy of the Italian Constitution, right, which they have studied in the last year of their education. I haven't read the Italian Constitution in detail, but it's a document which is given to school kids as they leave school. That to me is significant, right?
Yeah, as American high school students, it may not be the case in every school, but we have we learn about the Constitution, we learn about the separation of powers, that type of thing, and it's also obligatory at the university level as well to take classes in basic civics or basic political science, and taking those in university when I was at the University of Texas was a big factor in pushing me towards getting a degree in political science and, getting me where I am now in terms of my academic career. So I think it's very useful. And I mean, but that really doesn't exist in the UK, does it? I mean, is there any kind of real civic education at this point, or as far as to your understanding?
It's been a long time since I went to school, Mark, so I'm not aware of reading about it, in passing. Sorry.
Okay. And I remember when we met at the Whiskey Association there, we talked about the idea of the laws that have been passed, and you as a civil servant applying those laws, and that there was just a complete disconnect between what the law says and the way that you actually applied it. How do you think in an independent Scotland the law can be more updatable and more precise, so that there isn't that massive gap between these general principles that the law prescribes and, as you were saying, it was just you just made it up as you went along in terms of the way that you actually applied it? I mean, as I understood what you said.
Yes, well, I'm no lawyer, and that is a problem with, I think, a lot of civil service jobs, where you're guided by the regulations and the acts of Parliament that are laid for your subject matter responsibility. And some of the guidance has got to be really lengthy to work your way through the regulations that are in disparate parts of the corpus of law, because they have been enacted at different times over several years, and it's like a patchwork. It's like a patchwork quilt. With new technology, it should be easier to actually update the law to reflect the current picture. In other words, if you have an act which has changed over 10 times over 5 years, that's an exaggeration, then you should be able to pull up on your screen the amended version in its entirety, rather than have different volumes available to you. And it should be able to link up and be fully accessible. It should be available to citizens.
Yeah,
But
I totally agree. Obviously, you know, I in my in that constitutional development framework, I had this corpus of Scottish law where at this point I've got these different categories of law, and then I've got the Scottish laws, which you know, which are you know, which concern that particular area. But it's, I mean, obviously, what I do cannot have any, you know, legislative merit at this point. So, but all of these things could be so much so simplified. So you know, just put in basic, you know, no Latin, no complicated terms. Just explain the law clearly and accessible to everyone, and you know, that's it. But you know, I mean, you know, adopting that would be a very,
I mean, in an ideal world, Mark, the individual laws and acts should be linked and identified to the Constitution, the written Constitution, so that there's no misunderstanding about where within the Constitution certain acts of Parliament and certain laws and regulations lie.
exactly.
But that is a mystery to your average citizen, right? It shouldn't be. It should be easy to track, and it can be done. Independence is the opportunity, gives you the opportunity to do that. However, there may be more pressing social and economic needs that need to be addressed during a transition period. You know, transition period towards independence. So it's always about priorities. So that might fall by the wayside and be a long-term task. But it's something we should consider.
Or hopefully it can be something that's developed in parallel with a lot of the other things that need to be developed in achieving an independent Scotland. And so where do you see? I mean, where do you see the process right now? I mean, with with Nicola Sturgeon talking about the Section 30 order, with it kind of vague as to when that might happen, and all the legal things put through, that could impede that. I mean, how do you see the move towards independence overall at this point?
Well, I'm not holding my breath for a more concrete decision come the spring. Been disappointed so often. If we don't get, our proposal, our letter, running to 5 pages and a plan to have a legal, democratic, and quick path to independence, our politicians could pull that off tomorrow, as long as we start preparing the ground, if that decision is made. Otherwise, we've got to wait for the next actual election and make that the decision time for the public. But it can be done without a general election if we withdraw from the Act, withdraw from the treaty. But I can't see anything on the horizon politically to get round the gold standard Section 30 referendum, which we don't need. We do not need a referendum. We just need to withdraw from the treaty.
And do you have any insight as to why there's resistance to that? Or I mean, because I sent off what is it, 2 days ago, or yesterday, to all the politicians. We did get a response from Kenny McCaskill, but nothing else. And I'm just wondering what your insight is to why. I mean, if we at the SSRG are offering this opportunity, and why there wouldn't be more politicians saying, yeah, sounds good, let's do it.
No, well, I get the impression that they're all hiding, got their heads down. They're not enacting. They're not engaging, as far as I can see. I'm speaking from an SNP point of view. They don't seem to be engaging with the membership at the grassroots level, and the SNP are in the run-up to their next conference. So I suppose, as usual, it's keeping a united front behind the leadership, which is par for the course.
Because I know before we began that we were speaking before, and you talked about your SNP membership. What would you like to say about that? What would you like to say about that?
Well, my SNP membership is due for renewal next month. and I've decided I'm not renewing my membership. I've had enough in terms of the party. So I will no longer be an SNP member from next month. I will concentrate my efforts with yes campaigners and not from a party political point of view, because I see nothing in terms of independence from the political parties.
Okay, and could you expand on that as much as you wish to? I mean,
Yeah.
just based on your, you were talking about with your local branch member meeting and what would you like to say about that?
My local branch, right, Zoom meetings. That's 2 months in a row we've had a guest speaker who was an MP. Neither of them, the one this month didn't turn up, and the one last month didn't turn up. The one this month, on Tuesday, in fact, didn't turn up. No reason, no apologies. Last month didn't turn up because they cited, a vote or something in Parliament prevented attendance on the night. So, after that, I'm thinking, well, that's 2 months in a row, and it was an important meeting this week, and they didn't turn up. And at the branch meeting, there was no discussion, there was no mention of independence until any other business at the end, right? And I became an SNP member primarily because of independence. And my experience at branch level, on those 2 months, right, and earlier, was disappointing to say the least. So, I shall move on, and the talents that I have, I shall use them.
You're always welcome in the SSRG. So.
Well, it gives me an in, right? Because although that sounds a very depressing and sad note, I have had a recent endeavour which has been quite satisfying. I helped a friend, Ian Grant, to write a booklet, 40-page booklet called Scotland and Independence.
Okay.
Yeah.
I believe, Paul, you could put up the website to get yeah.
So it's a 40-page booklet, and Ian, who has been a stalwart independence supporter and campaigner for many, many years, and who I greatly admire, found an information gap when he was canvassing in his area, and decided to, plug the gap. So I was fortunate enough to help him write it. So the 40-page booklet fits in your pocket. So we've given it independence in your pocket is the catchphrase for it. Thanks to the Scottish Independence Foundation, we published 50,000 copies, which have been distributed across Scotland in yes groups since April, and it's been well received. I mean, it gives a short history of Scotland and makes a brief case for independence.
Can you give us the gist of it? I mean, of what?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it has a short history of Scotland, because we find that there are many new Scots and people who haven't been engaged on independence, don't know a bit about the country. I mean, there are aspects of the country of my country that I still enjoy finding out about. I watched a programme early in the week about the Picts.
I have the great pleasure of I've been giving many hours of courses in American history and American foreign policy, and I'm having a great time going through it. And so much of it is connected with Scotland and the UK and stuff like that. So I sympathise. I share your joy in
when you find something. I think Gordon Noble has a new book out on Picts, and there's very little, evidential history on the Picts. I find it quite fascinating. So this little book gives a little brief picture of Scottish history, up to date, up to independence, and then makes the case very briefly on how we could get there, where we're coming from, and where we could go with independence. And it's been so popular, it's gone out 50,000 copies. We've been funded for another 50,000, which are about to be distributed. And on this occasion, we've actually got a QR code in the book, so that if someone gets the book, they can actually scan the QR code, which takes them to an online version of the booklet.
Oh,
so it's
excellent.
Indie at your fingertips, or Indie on your mobile. So again, you can get the booklet, read it, scan the code, get the online version, and pass the booklet on to someone else.
Okay, and that's available. We see at the bottom of the page the Independence in Your Pocket.scot, and people can go to that website and scan it and get a copy.
Yes, the whole booklet is on that website. Right? We would hope to put new articles and updated information on the progress towards independence as it comes, and we'll notify that through our Twitter accounts. I think we've got a couple of, Pocket Indie, I think is one of our Twitter accounts.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Again, I should have switched my phone off. So we'll announce updates and articles which we'll put on the website through our Twitter account.
Yeah, and what do you think? I mean, and based on my experience in Scotland, I grew up, my dad's Scottish, and talking, but he was very anglicized in a lot of ways. And, I think, he grew up in the kind of the imperial age and this kind of adoration of the British Empire. And, my great grandparents worked on the Clyde, and they were, they I guess benefited from in that respect. But I remember speaking to my dad in his later years, and he got increased dementia, but he didn't quite understand why Scotland would want to become independent. And I think he sort of understood at the end, but again, it was like, he died in 2015 and all that. But excuse me. What would you say to someone like my dad, who was kind of, in the, who, profited from the British civil service, and was kind of anglicized, but how would you convince them, someone like my dad, that Scottish independence is a good idea? He wasn't against it, but he was kind of skeptical of it, towards the end of his life. He didn't quite understand, I think, but that could have had a lot to do with his dementia as well. But I know that's a vague question, but any way you want to respond is fine.
Again, it gets down to my approach is you look at something and say, what went wrong? What could we do better? And that applies to a country or the organs of state, the government. You can look at how the country ticks and how could it tick better, and then say who made that decision and will be part of that decision. And in Scotland, decisions are made. We are not part of that decision. We didn't make the decision. Someone else is making the decision for us, or spending our money. And you need to be in control of your own destiny. Scotland isn't in great part in control of its own destiny because it doesn't have all the levers. It doesn't make all the decisions. And there are choices. And if there's a choice, then the people who are on the receiving end of the decision should have the overall say. And that is not with us. I mean, I think I'm not dissimilar to your dad. I went through thinking the UK, my early years thinking the UK was a wonderful place. Yes. That's the way you're educated and taught and brainwashed.
Yeah.
But
and I grew up in the United States. I love my dad was a big fan of British trains, steam engines, all that, Brit rail, and there was stuff in it, it worked to a certain extent. Just for me as an American, thinking, oh yeah, Britain's great. It's got this great rail system. It's got these beautiful steam locomotives and all that, and so that kind of fed into it. But it's just so, and then there was the whole privatization under the Thatcher regime, and it just kind of changed, so
canvassing and campaigning for independence One of the most telling things that I've observed is the way that sometimes you can shake the confidence and the sense of purpose that some people have built up over a lifetime, and you explain things and you pose questions, and they take that as a personal attack because you're attacking their world, their belief system, and their experiences. And that can be very painful, and it needs careful management, or managing. You can't confront people like that because the shot will get, the hackles go up, you don't get anywhere. So it's a softly approach with some people. And I think there are fewer and fewer people like that.
I do think it's mostly older generations that see it that way.
But even people, as I've described, will come round. I mean, I have experienced in my circle of friends, acquaintances, and family that retreat hostility because it's shaking their belief system and their experience. It needs careful managing, and it's better managed individually and locally rather than large campaign messages which just go straight over the head.
Yeah, and how do you see the Scots as being kind of indoctrinated? I mean, what is it? There was the whole idea of too wee, too poor, too stupid. Maybe that's a bit of an oversimplification, but I remember when I spent time in Scotland, knowing my dad and having spent time in Scotland in the early 90s, there was a real, I don't know, just a kind of a reluctance. They didn't want to talk about politics. There wasn't, oh, that's too big for us. We're not worthy of political considerations. We're just these little people. It was that kind of sentiment that I got. Not that everybody felt that way, but I mean, how would you? I mean, but it seems to me as if that was kind of the way that many Scots have been indoctrinated to believe that they that they are inferior, that they couldn't make it in the world if it wasn't for these wonderful British or English. How do you see it? I mean, you being more familiar with them, I'm just seeing from a very outside perspective, but how do you see that?
Well, I haven't actually analysed how that came about on a personal level. It was just part of growing up in my education system.
Sure.
The social circle I had, and the propaganda and the news that was absorbed without thought when you're young or when you're busy, and it needs someone to actually prompt you to think about it. The great thing I think about the Scottish approach or psyche I've seen is that some of those messages are turned round and owned and used to good purpose to actually oppose, yes, we are a small country. Yeah. So we build that as a positive. We are we.
Yeah, no, it's a good, just like Norway, just like, I don't know, Estonia, Latvia, nothing wrong with that at all.
It's turning that round to your advantage. And I think, the first referendum campaign galvanized so much of the population that I think that's now a natural reaction to these sorts of jibes. A great part of the population can turn those things round to our advantage, to oppose them.
Okay. All right. Let me just look through the questions. It seems that independence is so far off, with Boris saying no, and the Supreme Court will probably say the same. Will we have a referendum by 2023? Obviously, we as the SSRG have a different solution, but I mean, just how do you see this whole thing of a referendum? I mean, I know I can predict your response, but
we see again. You see the mention of the Supreme Court. I mean, so many people think that we have to abide by the laws of the United Kingdom. As a sovereign state, the laws of the United Kingdom, if we want to be independent, we don't follow the laws of the United Kingdom. We do it legally and democratically, but what the Supreme Court says is of no consequence at all if we say that we are a sovereign state and we withdraw from a treaty. The Supreme Court, take a case to the Supreme Court, but if you don't engage, we're using international law and international opinion. So I can't see that we should get bogged down in the Supreme Court and play the UK game. I mean, as you know, the letter cites the International Court of Justice and the UK's response in the Kosovo case.
Exactly. Their submission to the Kosovo case, where they basically said that that if Kosovo wants to declare independence unilaterally, that there's nothing in international law that prevents it, and more meaningfully, that the that the law of the predecessor state cannot dictate at all the secession of the seceding state. So I mean, under the UK's own submission, they can't stop Scotland from just saying we're out of here, basically.
And it's democratic because the Scottish population has voted in an independence government, right? Independence supporting government, on successive elections, both at Westminster level and at Holyrood level. So it's democratic. The people are exercising their view. Yeah, the Parliament should follow.
I hope we can successfully convey that to the MPs and MSPs with our. But it's only the beginning of our campaign. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up soon, but just any message you want to send out to our viewers and, hopefully optimistic about
optimistic. Well, the message I'd like to convey is that, well, yes, a group of us have written a lengthy letter to our MSPs and MPs outlining a quick democratic and legal path to independence in the face of what I would think is appears to be a lot of inaction and a lack of preparation. So we need to convince our politicians that they need to get a move on. So politicians only get a move on when the electorate and their voters and their constituents get in touch with them. So I would urge everyone to actually read our letter, form a view, and then ask their MP, MSP what they're going to do about it and what is their view. If everybody does that, then we should get some movement.
Yeah. Okay. That letter will have been published on the website. Also, Yours for Scotland has published it, and Grousebeater has published it as well. So,
yes. Yeah.
So everybody, please go to those sites. Read what we've done, the letter, and encourage your local MP to support it. And this is the beginning of our campaign. We'll be going on further. We'll be talking to business interest groups, the fishing industry. Do you want to be back in the single market? Yeah.
The letter was actually published in the National today.
Oh, good! I didn't know that. Excellent.
The full letter published as a letter in the National, so it's out there.
And I am in touch with a friend who is friends with the head of EFTA, because we spoke to Mr. Omarsson, who was a lower level member of EFTA, but I'm hoping to get in touch with the head of EFTA and have a talk with him about it as well. But as long as as the letter states, as long as Scotland has the competence to join international treaties and the powers to abide by them, EFTA's not going to be too selective. I mean, it's like, come on in, it's not like people can't see how the UK is just making an arse of themselves on the world stage. They're like, come on in, Given
the UK government's approach to the Good Friday Agreement and the.
Absolutely. I've been thinking about that more and more. I mean, the way that they're just tearing it up, and nobody can trust the UK at all on anything, and nobody should sign any document with them because they're just gonna disrespect it. And you know, and that message is getting through. And you know, if they see Scotland like, yeah, well, of course we'll abide by international treaties respectfully. You know, I don't think, and again, given the very low standing of the UK at this point, especially in ripping up the Good Friday agreements, the Northern Ireland Protocol, I think it's an open door. You know, for in our view. So we'll be, as our group, we'll be contacting the head of EFTA and other things, but. I'm hoping we can get this thing moving because, in spite of any intransigence on the part of the Scottish government, but we just gotta push them, man. Can't stop.
Certainly will. Yeah.
Okay. And if you want to make any concluding remarks, that you're more than welcome. Otherwise, we can say goodbye to our
I've enjoyed our chat. It wasn't as difficult as I envisaged. I'm not accustomed to being.
It's all cool,
I'm not accustomed to being on camera, but I suppose all these Zoom meetings we've had has made me more relaxed. So it's been an enjoyable experience. I trust that I haven't talked nonsense and that people have actually taken out.
Oh no, you've been great. And I'm sure Paul will affirm that after the end of our conversation. So stick around for a bit. But anyway, thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for welcoming John. And he's one of our greatest colleagues on the SSRG. And go to the website, and we'll try to get the message out more about our proposal for independence, but go to Yours for Scotland and Grousebeater. They've both published our proposal, and get in touch with your MSP MP and say, get on board and get the hell out of the UK, basically.
Brilliant.
Okay. All right. Good night, everybody.
Cheers.